Okay, it looks like there's still a few people popping in, but it's 1 minute after 12. And so I want to go ahead and get started. I hope you can see my screen, the CAMES 12th edition. Are you ready? And my name is Jan Eichel. I would like everyone, if you would not mind, to mute your speakers right now, just so that it doesn't feed back to the other people that are trying to listen. And what we'll do is record this session. So if you are not able to attend the whole thing, or you have somebody that you'd like to also see it, that we can go ahead and let you view the recording. This all came from an idea. Dr. Tobin Miller and I delivered this presentation back at AMTC in Tampa. So you'll see the screen is the format of the slides. We didn't at that time anticipate that we would get a huge turnout, but the room was full. And I realized after that people talked to me about wanting to know what was in the standards and wanting to hear from CAMES more often. So people asked us for our slides afterwards, and I was a little reluctant because we are not covering every change in the standards. But I thought this would be helpful to give to all of our programs rather than you reaching out to us with individual questions. I want to reach out to you and be helpful. The programs are often the same, being accredited every 3 years, but the people who are doing it change through attrition, or maybe you were just handed it as a voluntold activity. And so as these changes occur, that I know that people want to remain up to date about CAMES and that they're maybe new to this role. So I hope you all brought your cell phones to this meeting, because this is going to be a little bit interactive. Hold on here. There we go. So this is my business card. If you want to go ahead and scan it and save it, you can look up at the upper right corner and it lets you add me to your contacts. So to give you a little background, for those of you that don't know me, I have been in the industry for 30 plus years in Southwest Michigan. I started out as a volunteer firefighter and served 25 years in that role, as well as being a certified flight nurse, an EMT paramedic in rotor wing, fixed wing, and ground. I became involved in CAMES because I was doing the PIF for my program, and I was a site surveyor for 15 years before I joined the board representing the Association of Critical Care Nurses. I did that for 2 years until I took this full-time job with CAMES exclusively, being Associate Executive Director. And my arm or specialty within the CAMES organization is focusing on clinical. So I have a disclaimer that I only represent CAMES, and it's a nonprofit peer review organization. And again, this is only a partial representation of the 12th edition standards. I urge you to at least obtain a written copy or a copy online at cames.org. And as you fill out the PIF, it is always important to read the actual standard. There is a partial rendition of the standard on the tool, but the entire PIF in the standards is what you're held to. So as you go through your PIF and fill it out, read those standards verbatim so you know exactly what you're trying to fulfill. This partial representation is not going to cover medical escort, special operations, or mobile integrated health today. They're just going to cover the standards that are the 12th edition that were released in October of 2022. There's been very little changes in the modes, which is rotor wing, fixed wing, and ground. So most of our talk today will focus on the other aspects of the standards. Remember that these are your standards. You write these standards. This is a committee that meets on a regular basis from everyone within the industry, and you're welcome to come and listen in if you'd like to. There's a consensus reached because we follow the ANSI standards for accreditation decisions. They're open for public comment always, and every comment receives a written response. After the standards committee writes these standards, then it's sent to the board, the CAMES board, for ratification. As we go forward through each section, go ahead and write any sort of questions in the chat. What I'd like to do is get through all of the sections and then go ahead and answer your questions for as long as we have time. I am I have the whole afternoon free, so I'll stay on and answer your questions as long as you need, but just add them into the chat. So this is participation time. This is where I want you to get your cell phones out. I want you to go ahead and scan this QR code and log into Mentimeter, because I'm going to be asking you some questions about your understanding of the standards. So we'll give everybody a few seconds, not a long time, and I'm going to check the chat to see what's going on here. Let's see, great, great, great. Hi, Lisa. Don't everybody say hi to me or I'm going to be here all day.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Good. I'm so glad you are. I'm so glad you
Hi
are.
there.
Does everyone have it loaded up now? Do you have your phone out and are you logged into Mentimeter? Great. Go ahead. So there's going to pop up a question. There's going to be 6 questions in total. A lot of people have logged in. So the faster you answer, the more points you will get. How many hours off work do clinical crew members need before any shift of 12 hours or more? So any shift of 12 hours or more, how many hours of rest should they have? You're going to have 15 seconds. And lots of people are answering, so that's fabulous. Okay, so the correct answer is 10. A lot of people knew that. Great. So this should compute who was in the lead. So bouncing forward looks like, oh, a lot of people got quite a few points. And Lovesight, you're in the lead. Let's move on to the real meat and potatoes here of the lecture. We'll have 6 questions total. And in the end, what I would like to do is mail you a copy of the CAIMS best practice. So if you want to go ahead and compete after this, then you could win the best practices mailed to you. So standard 010600 number 6. There is a policy that addresses encounters with an unmanned aerial system, a UAS or drone, a laser or a bird strike. There's a little bit of change in this, in that this policy has to address those impacted by laser strike for medical follow-up, and also limiting additional exposure by leaving the area of the encounter or taking any other countermeasures. So those are a change. 010604, programs are encouraged to develop a plan for succession and anticipate an unanticipated extended absence for key positions. It should address position vacancies, including when there's no incumbent to provide transition training, as well as an unplanned extended temporary absence. So what we have found is it has been problematic with attrition when programs suddenly have people leave, planned or unplanned, and there's no attrition, or I'm sorry, there's no succession planning. In the standards, it goes on to give you some examples that could be cross-training, identification of any successors with formal or informal education, mentoring, and any opportunities to participate and work together on projects. And what we really want is that no one person should be able to leave your program with vital program data and leave you unable to meet the standards. 010501, number 11. This was one of the standards. Number 11, compliance with the TSA 25 program, was printed initially in the standards and given out at AMTC, and it was deleted when it was voted on. So if you're looking at trying to meet number 11, go ahead in your book and cross that out, because it was deleted, but unfortunately it made it into print for a few of the first initial printings. And I've gotten some inquiries about that, on how to meet it. So I want to make sure that you're not putting any work into that. 010700, number 8. For all positions, aviation, clinical, comm, maintenance, there is a written policy addressing scheduling to avoid new employees working together, or as we call it, green on green. And green on green is in the definitions in the glossary in the CAMES book. It's a combination of two unseasoned or less experienced personnel working together. And we tend to define green on green positions as less than 1 year. So again, it should be a policy to avoid that in scheduling. 010700 number 9, a written policy addressing safety and clinical competency for full or part-timers that experience a low volume of transports. And this policy assures that all onboard staff are current and competent to the level of full-time active duty flight staff and the use of things such as NVGs or clinical equipment. So someone could be going on FMLA or a military leave, or maybe they're just in a low volume area and there's new ventilator. What this policy does is makes you have a plan to make sure that everyone is up to speed. 010901, there are formal periodic staff meetings for which minutes are kept on file and accessible to reference. This is quite often listed as a weakness for the programs. And so although there's not a lot new here, we have gone through and listed out the components that we're specifically looking through when we look at these meeting minutes. So these components would be the dates and times of the meetings and the titles, because we need to know who is attending, and saying that the meeting was Joe, Jim, and Bob doesn't really give us much opportunity for follow-up with those people. So full names as well as titles, and then the person who's presiding or the chair. And then when you write a discussion, make sure that it's a discussion and not an agenda, because the importance of discussion are that people read these meeting minutes to see what was talked about when they can attend. And so when you share those with staff, that discussion is important. And then who is assigned that, who has responsibility, is also important for the people who are not attending. So they may want to follow up with the person who's been assigned this. I have an example that if we were today having a meeting and we wanted to do a discussion about succession planning, it might be assigned to me, Jan, that I need to look at making a policy about succession planning, or a plan to have someone take my place. And next month in March, the meeting minutes would reflect that Jan had no report yet. But then in April, there might be a bit more discussion about the succession planning for my position, as well as I might provide a draft, and that would be in the meeting minutes. And then in May, we might go ahead and accept my plan and put that down as that the issue is closed, that there's loop closure, and that we would disseminate that then to the rest of the staff. So that discussion and succession, or I'm sorry, that discussion and that tracking through the minutes is important. This is the same standard. This is number 3, that you have a defined method for these meeting minutes to be disseminated to staff. So again, it's important to have that discussion and those assigned people outlined for this. And then please keep them for a period of 3 years so that you can refer back to them, as well as submit them to CAMES as needed. So quality management, going on to quality and safety. And again, you should be coming up on your phone with another question. I'll give you a second to get a hold of your phones. Everybody always has their phone very close by. Okay. Again, the faster that you can answer, the more points you get. Does your QM meeting need to be a standalone meeting? Yes or no, or are you even sure? I tried not to make the questions about the new standards, since maybe some of you haven't looked at those yet. Okay, a lot of people have answered no. Very good. The QM meeting can be part of one of your general meetings, but be sure that when you have that general meeting, that QM or safety, if it's part of a bigger meeting, is broken out in those meeting minutes. It doesn't need to be just a topic. It needs to be a subtitle. It needs to be broken out. Who is discussing the items, which items are still opened and which ones are closed. If in QM, you were giving some reports, then what are those QM reports? What is that scorecard you're reviewing? Or what is it that you're talking about with quality? What projects are you working on? So be sure if you do have them, that they're very clear. Good job. And in the lead, we'll see. And Justin is in the lead, but not by much. The two Justins are neck and neck. So onward into section 2, quality management. Quality management should be a work in progress with metrics that you're using to improve your program. The metrics themselves often link closely to education, in that when something is less than what you want it to be, you need to come up with a plan and put that plan in place with some education put some education in place to bring the knowledge base of your team up to speed. So when you are filling out your PIF, I want you to know that you are going to need to put an example of how the education, the clinical education process has been driven by a KPI or a key performance indicator or a gamut metric. So perhaps it's going to be that your airway first pass success rate wasn't as high as you wanted it to be. That could be your example, that it was 75 when you started. You met with the educator, you worked with them on putting a plan in place, and you put that plan in place, and then you retested and monitored your KPI to see if your first pass intubations were getting better. You may then tweak the plan and keep doing the ongoing tracking, trending, and monitoring to see if that education plan is working to improve it, until you get that standard to the desired level that you feel is successful. But you will need that to put in your PIF when you send that in. The next one is 020107 1F. This is about performance metrics. And the metrics that you identify by the program must be multidisciplinary and reviewed at least quarterly by senior executive level. So you may have a scorecard that you are going to present to the senior executive level, but identify that in the meeting minutes that this particular scorecard is being reviewed by senior executives, as well as that you are reporting on those metrics. So the metrics themselves are based on the scope of service. So if you are fixed wing or rotor wing or ground, you'll have different metrics. Some of those metrics are going to be marked required, and then under each individual discipline, there you must monitor at least one more performance metric. So for example, you may have customer service. You may also have, there are many clinical metrics, but what we often find is that some of the non-clinical metrics are not being measured. So make sure that you look at those and choose some. Under patient safety, one of the requirements is the number of never events. And remember, never events are those events that might occur even though you have plans in place that you would like them not to occur, but you want to make sure that you have defined what those are and track those. Those are required. 020301 number 1 is the designated safety director or officer has got formal safety training. And this is going to be pertinent to your scope of care, of course. There is the AIMS Safety Management Training Academy. OSHA has some safety training there, as well as TSI, the Transportation Safety Institute has safety training, or maybe your vendor has specific safety training that your safety officer can go to. A safety management system itself has to include the 4 components. We've spelled this out more clearly. The safety policy, the safety risk management, the safety assurance, and safety promotion. So there are several elements of these components, and they must include a statement of policy of the commitment for the accountable executives, a risk identification process and risk management plan to include, of course, a just culture, a system to track, trend, and mitigate risks or hazards. And then as well, a system to track and document incidences, root cause analysis, and a safety manual which can be electronic or hard copy, and a system to audit and review your organizational policy and procedures, your ongoing safety training for personnel, and a system of proactive and reactive procedures, not just reactive. Remember to make sure that you have proactive or things like audits in place to ensure compliance. 020305, number 4, there must be a safety person that represents each mode of transport on the program scope of service. So make sure that not just your primary mode of transport is represented on your safety committee. If you do fixed wing, rotor wing, and ground, then you need to have someone representing that is involved in those aspects. 020307 2D. This is under safety in the environment. This is a new one for rotor wing, that the helmet intercommunication system, the ICS cord, cannot be hardwired to the aircraft and should have a disconnect device or plug. So that, of course, is to allow for a smooth egress without snagging. So be sure to look at your rotor wing vehicles. 020307 2E. If there's an engineered mount present for specific equipment, that equipment must be secured in the mount at all times during vehicle movement. Again, this is safety in the environment. 020307 2H. If not required by the authority having jurisdiction, it's strongly encouraged to install on the following on your helicopters: crash resistant flight recorder systems, which include cockpit audio and images with a view of the cockpit environment and as much of the outside view as possible. It also should have an independent power source consistent with that required for cockpit voice recorders. 020307 2K and U. It is survival gear should be carried individually by each crew member. That is strongly encouraged. And at a minimum, this gear should include an appropriate signal device. Getting out of a hard landing, they may not be able to grab a hold of the survival kit. It may be out of reach, or it may be that they just can't get to it from their spot in the aircraft. So individual survival gear is strongly encouraged. The second piece of that is a policy addressing the carrying of lithium-ion batteries in the transport vehicle. We know that lithium-ion batteries can cause fires, and they should be stored away from sunlight, heat, and any flammable substances. And I think that everyone's well aware of the hazards that they cause. And again, that needs to be in policy. 020307 2V. This is a written policy to address observers, third riders, media that are being transported with or without a patient on board. And at minimum, the policy has to address confidentiality and HIPAA, the safety in and around the vehicle, what they should get a briefing, sterile cockpit, etc. The proper apparel. Obviously, if you're going out in the middle of the winter and they are wearing scrubs, then that's not appropriate. That they also have appropriate use of assigned equipment, such as their visors, their helmets, their intercom system, and how to use them. And then also securing their personal equipment and items to avoid interference with the safety or patient care. So you don't want camera straps getting tangled up in things. You don't want them to bring on so many things that they are a hindrance in the environment. This is an all new policy, by the way, that you'll need. So we're on to section 3, which now you know there's going to be a pop quiz again. So get your phone ready. And remember to answer quickly. If you're doing HPS, human patient simulation and clinical rotations, does the HPS need to approve by CAMES? You know that we do human patient simulation approval by sending in several documents. And then once you're approved, you don't need to send those documents in, but you do need to make a report of change if in fact you are making any major changes, such as where's your simulation lab. And you'll see that yes and no are both correct. So if you are doing HPS solely, of course, it needs to be approved by CAMES. But if you're doing HPS, if you're doing simulation and clinical rotations, say that you go to high risk OB personally and put hands on patients and have objectives, but you also decide to do an HPS, well, then you don't need that HPS for high risk OB to be approved. But as long as you fulfill everything by clinical rotations, it does not need to be. But a lot of places have been finding that it is best to do both clinical rotations and HPS and to get those approved. And that way, we all know that when you go to OB, sometimes you don't really see much more than just a normal birth, and there's not really a lot that you can accomplish to fulfill objectives. And so it's nice to be able to go to OB and get some experience clinically, but also to go in and do a very unusual HPS on high risk OB, in that it is a high risk OB who's also having a STEMI and ends up having some bleeding afterwards. So it makes it much more challenging. But yes, if you're using HPS instead of clinical rotations for any one of your topics, go ahead and get it approved. And who's in the lead? Oh, the Justins are not budging. Oh, Jessica's up there too. Good. I hope everybody's at least having fun with this. So 030501 1D. So simulation and teaching learning modalities are used as an adjunct to or a substitution for clinical experiences. There must be documentation that the scenarios and objectives are reviewed annually, that you have references that are current, and that the learning objectives were met. So there's just a little bit more reflected in this standard. If you were doing simulation before, now you'll be asked to submit one scenario for each area in your scope of service. So that's going to mean that you might need to submit high risk OB, pediatrics, trauma, or ICU, if those are within your scope. Of course, if you don't do any high risk OB, don't worry about it. You don't need to submit anything for that. So the most that you'll submit is 4. 030501 3F, current transport specific nursing certification pertinent to your scope of care and patient population, such as doing CNPT for teams that are doing neo and peds transports. This is required for nurses who have been employed for more than 2 years. This has been extended a bit in that CAMES will continue to accept a non-transport specific, such as CEN or CCRN, until January 1, 2025. So you still have a couple more years, but at that time, programs that are not in compliance should have a written plan. So maybe you have someone that's going to be retiring and they just don't feel like that they want to go ahead and do another certification exam. Then that's fine up to 2025. And they may at that point decide whether they want to not take the exam. And again, we're looking for substantial compliance. We're looking for that there are a number of people and the number of ways that the program is ensuring that people receive a transport specific certification. The piece about being specific to the scope, remember, if you are traditionally in the air, then CFRN would be pertinent to your scope, flight nursing versus transport nursing, which is primarily ground oriented. 030501 3G talks about the current paramedic certifications, such as NRP for a nationally registered paramedic is strongly encouraged for those being employed more than 2 years doing ALS and BLS. In addition, the FPC or CCPC certifications are required for paramedics who are doing critical care transport employed more than 2 years. And we're available for the role in patient populations such as being CNPT, NeoPeds teams that transport NeoPeds. It should be strongly encouraged that they get this specialty certification. So a paramedic can get CNPT, a nurse can get CNPT if that's all they do is NeoPeds. There we go. Okay. 030502 1E education specific to the in-flight and surface environment. And this is under safety education. The general aircraft safety is of course taught, and it's been added in-flight emergency and emergency landing procedures and training related to situations dealing with an incapacitated pilot is encouraged. This is not saying that someone needs to know how to land the aircraft. We're not asking everyone to become Sully Sullenberger. What we're looking for is that you have a plan that you can all agree with, from the pilot to the vendor of the aircraft to the medical crew, as to what should be done. Maybe your plan will be that you radio specific entities, but make a plan based on what you feel in your company you would like to do. 030502-1J is also under safety education. So this is survival, and they've added and egress training pertinent to the environment, to the medical service, which includes now, of course, water egress if you travel over large bodies of water. And again, you must have the hands-on practice of survival techniques and use of the items in your kit at least once every 2 years. So you may choose to use a training kit and have this on a rotating basis, base to base. You don't have to all train at the same time. You don't have to all go out and build fires and camp out overnight in the wild. You just have to know how to take things out of the kit and use them, and for what you supply in your kit. 030503-1G for services responding to incidents and scenes and supporting of disaster response, you must maintain FEMA. So since this is in community safety, but it is in the operations, the clinical operations, sometimes the FEMA training is missed, and we've been incorporated this table. So you can see that pilots who respond to scenes, whether they be rotor wing or fixed wing, will need FEMA training. If the pilots of, if they're specialty teams and they don't respond to scenes, then that's certainly not part of their wheelhouse. And also if they are fixed wing pilots that don't respond to disasters or any sort of scene, they don't need it. But if you look at, if maintenance responds to the disaster responses where there are staging aircraft, then they also need FEMA training. So other than that, always there needs to be some management that are involved at the IS 800 level. And again, that's for management only. Under medical configuration, 030601 10C, medical supplies, a feedback mechanism for CPR, effective CPR, excuse me, is encouraged. So again, real-time feedback. 030601, number 16, for services that administer blood, there has been an addition to this that is encouraged that you use a warming device during the infusion of the temperature-controlled blood. 030601, number 17, again, under medical configuration, the fetal Doppler heart rate monitoring is required if you are doing high-risk OB transports. So remember, this is Doppler, not TOCO monitoring. We're not looking at trying to monitor contractions. And remember that when you look at high-risk OB transports, it needs to be directly related to pregnancy. And so picking up patients, including trauma and scenes, does not count as high-risk OB. Those are in the definitions in your PIF for under your statistics as to how you would track those. But high-risk OB does not include trauma and non-pregnancy related issues. 030601, number 19, it talks about strapping down and securing equipment. And if you do use a strap or a belt to secure equipment, it cannot be stored with the belts looped through the handles as they tear easily and dislodge. So if you look at the slide on the left, you can see it goes only through the handles, which I know makes it very easy to open up the top and get what you want out and put it back, but it does not hold the bag in place if you were to have a hard landing. And so you want the straps going around the package and then through the handles themselves. The last one is about the gamut. And again, reporting is encouraged, but we have never required reporting. And I know that there's a fee for that now, and we're getting some questions about that, but reporting is not required. But please make sure you look at how much gamut you are collecting, and that for each level of the CAIM standards, you need to collect 5 different metrics. So for BLS, you would collect 5. If you were doing ALS, you would collect 10, 5 more. And if you were doing critical care, you would collect 15. Those metrics, just make sure you choose those that are important to you, and then go ahead and make sure that you are collecting the appropriate number. And those will be asked for when you're filling out your PIF, which ones you're collecting and the percentages that you're reaching with those. So section 4, communications. And here comes your question. True or false? Communication specialists are responsible for making all notifications in the PAIP. And you're right, that is false. Now, the PAIP should be written so that some of the burden is taken off of the communication specialist, and he's able to make initial communications, but obviously there's notifications down the line as you go to family members and to additional crew that are off duty, and the communication specialist is not necessarily responsible for that. So it's not true. And we'll see who's in the lead. We'll see if Justin and Justin, maybe Jessica can knock them out. Oh, still in the lead. And Stingalicious is coming up. So under COM 040301 number 1, staffing must be commensurate with the mission statement and scope of care of the medical transport services. So what they're looking at is making sure that you have the staff in the COM center for the amount of calls and call volume during the time of day, as well as any other duties that they have to attend to. So again, there's going to be some ebb and flow of staffing if that's how your workflow is during the shift. 040301 number 2E, a risk assessment plan addresses fatigue and focuses on volume and other distractions in the COM center. So we've broken out the risk assessment to make sure that you have these kind of pieces in place for the written plan. Oh, 040302 1R and 1S. Initial training has to include training in landing zone safety, because you want to make sure that if they need to give verbal instructions over the phone to someone who may be a little bit panicked or untrained. And then also S, knowledge of local geography, facilities, and transport resources, as well as some clues to spotting helicopter shopping. So again, this is new. 04030221T, initial training should include, this is if you are a coordinator for long range flights. So this is new, and if you don't do long range flights, it does not pertain to you. Formulating estimates of transports, knowledge of referral and receiving in the intermediate areas, and knowledge of resources for the customer, crews, and family members. 040804 number 2, the PAIP drill is conducted. Now, I know in the past we have said that you needed to have 2 drills a year. So this isn't really changing it that much, but what we found is that time gets away from people. And what we really want is for you to be remaining current in testing your PAIP. And so now the drill itself has to be conducted every 6 months. And remember that it needs to still be 1 daytime and 1 nighttime per year. And it needs to be all modes of transport during the accreditation period. So within 3 years. You also have to make sure that you have a thorough debrief and an after action report or plan, and then that summarizes your drill. Then the results of the drill and the after action report and plan are shared with your staff. and that you have a method to document progress and loop closure on this for corrective issues. You can use an actual incident or accident, but make sure that it tests the entire plan and that you've put together a good after action report with an after action plan and that you have loop closure. Just saying that you made a precautionary landing and Jed did a great job does not fulfill it all. This just gives a sample of how you might do a drill every 6 months and then fulfill as well doing all modes of transport. If you only have one mode, then you're going to be doing the same one over and over. And there's no requirement for doing a maximum. You can do as many as you want. But what you should be doing is making sure that, say, your drill that you had a problem with visitors coming into the comm center. Your after action report should identify that, and it should assign that to someone, maybe the comm manager. And then in that, you should have a plan on how you're going to mitigate that for the next one. Maybe you're going to do some education. Maybe you're going to put a sign up. Maybe you're going to lock the door. And then the next time you test the plan, go ahead and make sure that you note that and see how it worked. You may need to tweak your plan, but test your plan and close that loop. 04, 08, 05, an annual test of the emergency procedures in the comm center that includes evacuation drill and reestablishing communication. So you can use an actual evacuation as well if it tests the plan thoroughly and it's debriefed and you have an after action report with lessons learned and corrective actions. So you may use a real fire drill or weather incident, but make sure that you do an after action report and plan and then test it again. 04, 11, 02, number 1 and 2, the policies in the comm center need to be dated and signed by the appropriate manager, and they need to be reviewed on a biennial basis every 2 years. There weren't a lot of changes in Rotor Wing, so get your phone ready. True or false? Rooftop heliports must have 2 access points that are oriented at least 90 degrees apart. And if you'll notice, I give you a little less time as we're getting towards the end, especially if it's only true or false. True, very good. A lot of people that don't have rooftop heliports might not have known that. And let's see who's in the lead. Oops. Oh, I didn't do a leaderboard. I forgot. I was thinking we might need the time. So then the next 05, 04, 03, number 2, this is a new option. This is called the Pilot and Command Experience Evaluation Tool. There are samples in the 12th edition for you to look at. And what you need to do is develop your own tool that would state what experience and skills would a pilot need to have if they did not meet, or you needed it as an alternative to this particular standard. The tool is then sent into the CAMES Aviation Committee to be approved. And once approved, you can use that as a hiring tool to hire pilots for your program. And again, that's found in Addendum C of the 12th edition standards. But when you read this standard, this box of explanation will be there. 05, 05, 01, number 2, mechanics must receive formal training in human factors, fatigue management, and maintenance error reduction. So again, fatigue management has been added there. 05, 05, 02, number 1, it is strongly encouraged the mechanics will not be permitted to work more than 14 continuous hours. And this 14 continuous hours has to include duty related travel time. So if they are traveling to where the aircraft made a precautionary landing at an airport, that travel time has to be included in the amount of work day that they have. 05, 05, 03, number 2, a written policy and procedure to notify flight and medical personnel when the aircraft is out of service. So it used to just be that there was a method in place. Now it needs to be in policy. So go ahead and put whatever methods you had in place into policy now so that it can be followed up with. 05, 05, 03, 4J, the use of appropriate maintenance ladders and fall protection are strongly encouraged in the maintenance department. And under fixed wing, a pressurized aircraft with air conditioning is strongly preferred for medical transports. And if the sea level cabin cannot be maintained, a physician who's familiar with altitude physiology must be consulted, or you must have written policies in place to address altitude limitations for your specific disease processes. So if you have an unpressurized cabin, you need to have these policies in place or be able to make medical control contact. And again, this new option for pilot and command experience tool is available for fixed wing, and you can see that in the 12th edition, and there's examples in the addendum C. We're on to surface. And we're going to have our last, well, darn, it's giving me an error on the quiz right when I wanted to ask you a last question, but that's all right. We'll go on. Who is in the lead without that last question? It looks like Justin. You can contact us to get that copy of CAME's best practice, and we'd be happy to mail that out to you. We have one more thing, ground service that does not accept or advertise requests for ground transports, but is strictly available flight crews when the aircraft is out of service is not considered dedicated ground and is not required in the accreditation application. However, we must have you present the following to ensure safe and appropriate flight line and ground to air transport. So there should be a checklist to verify onboard equipment is in working order. There and oxygen sufficient, and the sweat stretcher must be able to be crew. The operator uses a hands-free communication system and texting is prohibited. The ground ambulance is also EMS licensed by the state or the authority having jurisdiction. So that was all of the standards that I had brought up. If you want a copy of the best practices, you can look at this QR code of some of the standards. And then it's also available for purchase. I think it's like $25 on a thumb drive. You can see that on our website. The other thing is that I find it very handy to do the 12th edition online and download it and use it for a word search. When I'm looking for something about helmets or I'm looking for something about survival training, I go ahead and just pop that word into the word search of my PDF and it comes up with every available avenue that it could be at. And that's also available on our website, so you could get that at any time. The last thing I want you to do is I have which I hope it works. Oh, there you go. I would like you to go ahead if you have this up on your phone and rate your presentation. The other thing my last question calls for is, would you be interested in joining a CAMES online community? If we started a group that was working on sharing information, then if you would find that helpful, then we might look at avenues that we could set that up, because I would really feel like that in my history, I felt like I was out there all by myself for a while there, and I thought it would really be helpful if people were available for me to talk to.